Laptop.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to our webinar, The Art of Hanging Out, Understanding the Skills Teen Needs to Plan and Host a Hangout. When it comes to hanging out with friends, teenagers are expected to plan and host get-togethers largely on their own, free of parents' intervention. But planning and hosting a hangout is a complex process, full of social nuances that can be confusing. So Justyna is here with us this morning, and she'll provide an overview of the key skills that teens need to master so they can successfully plan and host a hangout. And she'll give you ways you can help without undermining their newly found independence. Justyna is a board certified behavior analyst with a master's degree in education and co-founder of the Hangout Spot. She has over 15 years of experience with many different types of learners between the ages of 3 and 18. For more information on Justyna and the Hangout Spot, you can visit our website at spednetwilton.org and our Facebook page. All the information from today's webinar, including Justyna's PowerPoint, will be uploaded to the SpedNet Wilton website. Our moderators today are Eve Kessler, founder of SpedNet Wilton, and I'm Carolina Corrigan. Couple of ground rules. Feel free to ask questions through the Q&A button. We will answer them at the end and in the order they're received. Please don't use the chat button because it's very hard to keep track. Be mindful that this is an open forum that is being recorded and we cannot guarantee confidentiality, so you may not want to reveal any private information. Any information provided in this webinar by Justyna or the moderators is not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. This information, content, and materials are for general information purpose only. And with that, I will hand over to Justyna.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really excited to be collaborating with you ladies on this very important topic. That hanging out is like you said, very, very complex, and there's a lot of skills that go into it. But it's also such an important piece of teen lives and adolescence because it really prepares them for adulthood, finding their tribe, figuring out their place in the world, and so forth. So I'm excited to be talking to you about the skills that teens need in order to make hanging out and planning a hangout successful. So close friendships. One of the best ways to form close friendships is really beyond school organized events and extracurricular activities. So, these are certainly places where friendships can start. But when we think about true friendship, right, that takes effort on both parties' ends. It's a choice. And because it's a choice, in order to really get to know someone on a deeper level where that friendship is something that will outlast those organized events. So, when those organized events come to an end, when you're no longer in class with that peer, are you still able to maintain contact? That really falls to creating a deeper connection. And in order to be able to do that, you have to find time outside of these organized events that are really a matter of convenience to be able to help foster and develop those friendships over time. So there's probably a lot of questions about this, right? So how do we even do that? What if my teen can't find a peer group? There could also be obstacles and barriers and skills that are missing. And we're going to dive into a little bit about each of these topics, and then talk about how we can help our teens to be able to practice these skills. So we're going to cover a lot today. We're going to touch on the importance of of friendship and talk about practice. So one of the really big important things that we focus on at the Hangout Spot and that we stress the importance of, whether that's for teens or for young learners, whatever social skill or nuanced social behavior a learner is trying to learn, the most important aspect of getting that skill to be acquired and feel fluent, feel like muscle memory, is practice. So one of the things that we always share with people is you can't learn to ride a bike by reading a book about how to ride a bike. You can't learn how to swim by reading a book about how to swim. You have to get in there. You have to get down and dirty. You have to practice. So that is often the missing piece with why sometimes our teens, our kids who know, quote unquote, know the rules of how to hang out or how to go about a hangout or how to do certain things, they can tell you when you give them scenarios and they can perfectly articulate what they need to do. But then when it comes to actually doing those things, they fall short. They can't do it. It's because that practice component is missing. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the logistics. So how do we decide on a location? How do we decide on activities? How do we help our teens and coach them on identifying a peer? How do we identify obstacles and overcome them? What communication skills do our teens need in order to be able to have a successful hangout once it's put together? How do we prepare for the hangout? What types of rules need to be in place that are implied rules in a hangout that need to be followed? How do you know when you need to intervene, and what should that look like? How do you go about it? This is going to be really, really careful, a careful balance, right? Carolina mentioned, how do you do that without undermining your teen's newfound independence, right? That's going to be really important. So we'll touch on that. How do we end the hangout? And then what do we do after, right? So, when we're going back to that example of riding a bike, someone teaches it to us, someone shows us how to do it, we get on that bike and we try our best. What happens after? Is that the end? No, there's some sort of debrief, right? There's some sort of feedback. Okay, here's what you did well. Here's what we can do moving forward to make this better. And how do we even have that conversation with our teens who sometimes are just really, really stubborn and don't want to hear anything because they're always right as they're asserting their newfound independence? So we're gonna try and cover a lot of things here. And then of course, as we go through these slides, we'll also touch on, how do we think about adapting this to today's world? Because, Hangouts pre-2020 were a lot different than Hangouts 2020 and going into this year. And hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be able to regain some sense of that quote unquote normalcy again as vaccines come out and everybody goes through that process. But until then, we also need to have a better understanding of how we can tackle this in the meantime and still begin to work on it, because we are all social beings, right? So from the moment that we are born, we rely on successful social interactions with other people in order to survive. And that's very important for babies. It's very important for kids. It's very important for teens. It's important for us as adults. Okay, so importance of friendship. This really cannot be underscored. It's important growing up as a child, but it's even more important during the teen and adolescent years, because this is really the time where teens are beginning to learn to become more independent. They want to do more things on their own. They're starting to branch out and spend more time with their peers, less time with their parents and their families. And that is really important because it helps to form their identity. They're beginning to test the boundaries of what they're able to do successfully, where they need help. They're able to, friendship helps them find acceptance and belonging. And there's also lots of benefits to positive mental health that go along with developing meaningful friendships with others. Okay. So things like boosting self-esteem, things like being able to better regulate yourself emotionally, things like decreasing your chances of depression. So again, we're all social beings. And we rely on social interactions with others. We are not meant to be isolated. So whether you have the skills necessary in order to form successful social relationships with others or not, does not mean that you prefer to be isolated, right? You still crave that social interaction. You may just not have the skills or understanding to know how to go about it. Okay. So the importance of developing friendship has really significant impacts on positive mental health, on those types of things. So it's very critical that we help our teams figure out how to navigate these, how to practice these skills that will then translate into higher level skills that they'll need in adulthood, whether they're going to apply for a job somewhere, or applying to college. All of these are going to be important skills. Okay. So as we're going through this, and as you're kind of conceptualizing, okay, who can I get my team together with? How can we make this work? Remember that if your team doesn't have practice with these skills, initially, the goal with setting up these hangouts is to practice using these skills with others. So that means that sometimes you're going to run into obstacles and problems, right? That means that not every single hangout will be successful. The key is to continue trying, to continue adapting and continue changing, because again, learning about these skills is only one step in the process of being able to actually contextually apply them, right? That critical step, and I'm going to repeat this over and over again because we really feel like that's the missing link in today's social skills instruction out there, is we don't take it from the step of teaching and telling and sometimes showing to actually getting kids, teens to practice, right? And then they are not able to make that connection. They're not able to develop those muscles and skills they need to a point where they feel so comfortable using them that it's second nature, so that when they actually need to pull those skills out and apply them in context, they don't have to think about it, right? Think about when you are learning a new language. In the beginning, you're thinking about every single word. You're translating every single word that you want to say in that language in your head first before you say it. But think about speaking English or or any other language that you're fluent in. Do you think about what you're going to say and translate it into that language first? You don't. It's muscle memory, right? It just happens because you've had enough practice with it where you feel comfortable. All right, so let's dive into logistics. Like how do we even begin to conceptualize making this happen? The first thing we need to consider is location. So there are two choices for having a hangout occur, and actually three if we think about today's COVID world, right? So a hangout could happen in the home, a hangout could happen in the community setting, or a hangout could happen online virtually, right? So we've got things like Netflix party, we can use Zoom. There's interactive ways to be able to play games on Zoom. So we've got three locations in reality, right? What are the benefits of those locations, and when does it make sense to use one over the other? So if we're thinking about the benefits of home, or even a Zoom-based environment at home, it's a much more controlled environment, right? So if you need to change the activity, or because something's not going well, if you need to get access to use the bathroom, if you need a snack or something, all of those things are there, right, at your fingertips. You can kind of shift and change course and adjust very easily. When you're out in the community, that's a lot further, right? As if you're a teen, you're relying on either walking to get there, you're relying on an adult to get you there. When you're committed to one particular activity and you're committed to doing that activity for the duration of time, unless it's really preferred for both individuals, if you come across an obstacle, a disagreement, or you get bored of it, you're there for that time period. What are you going to do? Your options to do something else are a little bit more limited, right? Now, sometimes the home might not be an option, right? And that could be due to a variety of different reasons. So, a home space hangout is not available. So, the home space is pretty small. It's shared by a variety of different family members. So it can be really difficult to perhaps get some separated space, time alone with your friend. Sometimes the living conditions may be uncomfortable. Perhaps there's some sort of dysfunction or other things happening in the home where you wouldn't want to bring a peer into the home. And sometimes distance, right? Distance can be a barrier. So you are just living too far away from your peer, and a nice central neutral location is more beneficial, right? So lots of things to consider when you're thinking about location. And again, depending on where your teen is, where your learner is with respect to the skills that they already have, skills that they need to work on, you may opt for one location over another. And as we dive into a little bit more of the logistics, it will make sense as to why you would do that. So we figured out, we have a better idea of, of where this could take place. What types of activities do we consider? So we have structured activities and unstructured, and within those, there is a variety of different things that you can do. But if your teen has limited skills, limited interests, limited ability to have reciprocal conversations and interactions, structured is better. Okay. So structured takes the pressure off of finding something to do. And it takes the pressure off of heavy conversation activities. So if we look at something like these two boys or these two people here playing a video game, right? That video game, they're playing it together. There's a sense of interaction, but the conversations around the video game, around this context, are around whatever they're doing within the video game. So there's kind of like prompts embedded within that game that can kind of clue on, give clues as to what types of things can be discussed during that interaction. So if your teen struggles with conversation, having a structured activity, whether you're doing that in person or in Zoom or out in the community somewhere, is going to be beneficial because it's going to take some of those pressures off, take some of that thought process out, so they can really just focus on enjoying the interaction as opposed to thinking about every single piece of it. Now, if your teen already has some of these prerequisite skills, then unstructured is a great way to harness the power of creativity. And teens, just like kids, can get very creative. So it also relies on more communication, more problem solving. There's a lot more trading information going on, which we'll kind of dive into in a little bit as one of the prerequisites of having successful Hangouts. So things to consider, really, your teen best as far as where they are with their abilities, as to whether a structured or unstructured activity would suit them better. Okay, so we've gone over location, we've gone over considerations for activities. How on earth do we identify a peer for our teen? Okay, so in the ideal situation, right, our teen would already have a peer that they're interested in learning more about outside of the context of school or extracurricular activity. That peer will have in some way, shape, or form expressed a mutual interest in doing the same. Okay, that's the ideal situation. we are here because many of us don't find ourselves in that ideal situation. So how do we help our teen identify an appropriate peer? So great places to find pools of peers are obviously school. School is one place. So figuring out, who does your child sit with during lunch the most often? Who's your child walk to class with? Who does your child talk to the most or interact with the most during downtimes? Neighborhood peers. So are there similarly aged peers in the neighborhood that could potentially serve as again, remember in the beginning, we're talking about creating opportunities for practice, right? So if these are skills that our team needs to develop, the first initial few hangouts may not lead to super close friendships. They may not lead to repeated opportunities. They may, but they may not, right? But the most important piece is they're opportunities for practice. Like I cannot underscore that enough. So relatives, right? If you can't find pools of peers, are there cousins within a similar age where your team can jump on a Zoom and do some games, or perhaps they can come over and you can get something going in that capacity. Peers from family friend groups. So sometimes our parents have friends who have kids of similar age. They're not necessarily getting together, but it could be an opportunity, right? A safe opportunity to set up a hangout. Extracurriculars, so sports clubs, the libraries, and they've adapted now to COVID too. They have such a wealth of resources and opportunities for kids and teens to get together over common interests. And the cool thing about libraries and checking out your local library is oftentimes they have clubs and offerings that are really unique interest based that you can't find anywhere else. And on top of that, if your child has a really unique interest that you can't find a club or an activity for, you can go to your local library and suggest, hey, what do you think if we can put this together? And they'll listen to you because that's what they're there for. They're there to create opportunities for community. So another great place to find peers. Now, what are some obstacles that we can face? So no source of peers for friendship. If that's the case and you can't find a source within the school context, within that ideal situation, again, branch out. So get your kid out to some sort of extracurricular activity, get them involved in a club. And if nothing's out there, go to your local library, propose that they create something, work with them to create something, and they will work with you, which is the awesome, amazing piece of this. My daughter, loved the library, and we took advantage of everything that they had there. And they were just so amazing with listening to like kids' feedback. So, kids give them, oh, wait, what do you think if we did a 3D printing club? And they'll consider it. They put the idea out, and if they gain enough interest, they'll put it in place. Okay, so what if your kid has a bad reputation with where they are? Now this is or could be a topic in and onto itself. How do we handle that? How do we begin to turn that around? We're not going to get into that. But if your child has a bad reputation, then again, you're going to want to branch out. You're not going to be pooling from the sources that your child has a bad reputation in. So if your child has a bad reputation in school, you're going to pull from places where their school peers aren't present. So because we don't want that reputation to follow them, that's going to hinder their ability to get a hangout up and running, hinder their ability to be able to practice it. Okay. Communication skills. So what types of communication skills do our teens need as a prerequisite to being able to have a successful hangout? So exchanging information is really important. So can your teen make related comments? Can they ask related questions? Sounds really basic, but the bulk of teen interaction is around some sort of conversation, being able to find common interests. That's how you can identify what types of activities are going to be successful to propose or set up during a hangout, to have that mutual interaction over. So, you know, depending on where your learner falls within this range of being able to communicate will help you determine whether or not you need to have a structured activity or an unstructured activity, have an activity in a more controlled environment or have an activity in a less controlled environment. So really important considerations to take into account, because people or learners who have fewer language abilities, we want to be able to create opportunities and activities that kind of mitigate for the amount of language that needs to be used during that time. Okay, so how do we help our teen prepare? Okay, so when we're thinking about helping our teen prepare, we have to help them answer some of these questions. And as you do more and more Hangouts and you go through this process with your teen, over time, they'll begin to think about this on their own. So, answer questions like, who's going to be there? What types of activities are we going to do? Plan those things ahead of time. So again, if your teen already has trouble with interactions, the more you can plan and prepare ahead of time, the more you can practice ahead of time, the more you will be able to set them up for success for when that hangout actually happens. Where will it take place, right? So identify that location. When and for how long? So how long is a really important consideration. If your teen struggles with social interactions, if your teen doesn't have much practice with Hangouts, we may want to make these shorter. So consider making them an hour in the beginning, or maybe even half an hour. The goal is to get the practice and to set up those opportunities to be successful. So practice and success will then lead to more opportunities, which will then lead to more practice and ability to feel successful. Okay. How is the get together going to happen? So, if you've chosen a location outside of the home, how are they going to get there? What time they're going to meet? All of these things are really important. And then when you help your teen figure out the answers to these questions, you can then begin to maybe even role play them with them, or the aspects of these activities that you think that they're going to have trouble with. If the activity is going to take place in the teen's home, one of the really, really important things to take into consider, because we all have things that perhaps we don't mind sharing with others, but then we all have things that are our own, and we don't want others to ask about or play with or manipulate. So talk to your teen about putting away any personal items they wouldn't want their peer, their Hangout peer to look at or have access to. Again, teach teens the value of making our space presentable. So again, whether you are meeting in person at home or via Zoom, right? If your space is super cluttered behind you, again, that's not super important. And that's like, once we get through all of the other more important skills of setting up, of the conversations, right? That really falls at the bottom of the list. But then if we get through those other skills and they've mastered them out to fluency, that's also something that, is a great life skill, right? So when we have people over, we want them to feel comfortable. And if our space that we're having them in is super messy, chances that they're going to be feeling comfortable are probably less than if we had a more inviting space. Okay. So again, super at the bottom of the list as far as considerations and importance in prioritizing. But it's there, right? At the end of the day, it's an important life skill down the line. Okay. So what skills does your teen need to during a get together, right? So if we're talking about actually inviting someone into your space or meeting someone out into the community, you have to greet whoever you're meeting, right? So, if that skill's not there, that's something you have to practice. If they're coming into your home, you have to invite them in. If they're coming on Zoom, you have to click the accept button if you've sent that Zoom invite, otherwise they're never going to get in, right? Introduce them. So if you're with a parent or a sibling who's dropping you off, or they're in the presence and that peer hasn't met them, you're going to do a quick introduction. Hey, Sam, this is my mom, and this is my brother Joey, and vice versa, right? So another important step that's going to help your teen help their friend or their peer feel more comfortable if they're entering your space. Because if they need something, they know who to ask. They know that person by name. It's going to eliminate some of that awkwardness. If they're coming to your house for the first time, you may give them a tour, right? So what would you tour them of? You're not going to tour them of your parents' bedroom, but you're going to give them a tour of where the bathrooms are, right? Because that's important. You're going to give them a tour of where the kitchen is, of, where the doors are, etc. Where your room is, where you're going to be hanging out. Offer refreshments. Again, this really only applies if you're doing in home, but if you are having a get together and it's for an extended period of time, you may want to offer your peer or friend some water or a snack. And then ask them what they want to do. So if you've pre-selected a series of structured activities that you're going to do with your teen, or that your teen is going to do with their peer, then you may coach your teen to give that peer a choice on what they want to do first. If the hangout is more unstructured, then you're just going to have your teen ask the peer what they would like to do first, or what they like doing, and then it would commence from there. Okay, so what kind of rules do we need to teach our teens to abide by when they have a get together? So the first one is to give guest choices, right? So whether you're having someone in your home, whether you're doing a Zoom get together and you're the one who invited, same rules apply. We want to give opportunities for our guests to choose whether or not they continue playing or hanging out with a certain activity, playing an activity, watching something, the type of snack that they're going to have, etc. And those are all things that are going to make them feel more comfortable. So we want to teach the skill of giving a choice. We want to teach our teen to check in with their peer and see, read their body language. Are they bored? Are they kind of doing their own thing in the corner and not really interacting, right? What should our teen do in that situation? So you can walk through and talk through what that would look like and practice that ahead of time. Teaching them to be super flexible. So if your teen has a really hard time with winning and losing games, do not structure the hangout around winning and losing games. Help them structure it around perhaps a craft of some kind, or perhaps games that are more cooperative in nature and activities that are more cooperative in nature, because then you're going to set them up for failure, right? Then it's going to ultimately end up with someone winning, someone losing, an argument, and not wanting to have a hangout with that person again. Teach your teen to give compliments. So periodically, when people hang out together, when they're engaging in conversation, they may compliment each other in a variety of different ways, whether that's, hey, wow, great job. You won that game. That was an awesome move, or whatever that is within the context of what you're doing. And then this is where that conversation piece comes in. And again, depending on where your teen is, will determine what type of activity you're going to structure. But typically when teens get together, when people get together and they're hanging out, they're trading information and sharing information. And people are typically, unless they're presenting something, right? they're sharing information with each other about half the time. So half the time on average, people are taking turns with the speaking role. And there's a lot of things that go into having conversation, right? There's active listening, there's making comments, there's asking questions, there's different types of comments that you can make. There's body language that goes into showing that you're interested, right? So these things can get really, really complex. And again, depending on where your teen is, that will help you guide or help guide you in helping them to select the right activities for a hangout. So you've got a hangout going. How do you know when to intervene, right? One of the things that, and this is going to be a really careful balance, right? Because our teens are at a point in time where they're trying to assert their independence. And they also want to look good, presumably, right? Unless that's a skill deficit in terms of social interactions being motivation. They want to make a good impression on the person they're hanging out with. So we want to be careful with identifying times when we intervene, and only intervene when we absolutely have to, when the interaction is going so far south that if you don't intervene, something catastrophic could happen, like, someone going home crying, or, bullying, or those types of situations. So when do we intervene? When you hear ongoing arguing or yelling. So now kids disagree with each other. Teens are going to disagree with each other. We as adults disagree with each other. There is a level of disagreement that is healthy because it allows us to utilize our communication skills in order to problem solve, come up with a solution, etc. But if you are in and around the house and you're overhearing the conversation. So again, we're not going to be hovering over our teens, whether they're on Zoom or whether they're in the house or out in the community. We're not going to be hovering over the hangout, because that hangout will likely never happen again. Okay. But we could be within proximity. So if you're at home, you could be folding clothes in the other room with the door open, right? You can overhear the conversations that are happening. So if you hear ongoing arguing or yelling, and there's no efforts to find a solution, that's probably a time when you would need to intervene. If you see that your teen abandons their peer and is doing something solo, and the peer is kind of just sitting there waiting for the time to pass until it's time to go home, that's probably a time to intervene. If you hear the guest peer, continually advocating for something, and your teen maybe is not picking up on some social cues, that may be a time to intervene. Okay. So we're intervening in very, we'll talk about how to intervene next. But when we're intervening, we're being very selective, right? We're not going in to correct every single thing our teen is doing, because that's going to ruin the chances of a hangout happening again. But also, it's not going to be very motivating or reassuring for our teen, right? It's going to be defeating. Well, I keep getting corrected on this stuff, I just can't do this, right? Maybe it'll decrease their motivation to want to try a hangout again. So be selective with when you intervene. How to intervene. Okay, so we've talked about that this needs to be a covert operation, right? So we are not hovering over. But then what happens when we actually do need to intervene? When we've identified one of those situations where, oh gosh, if I don't step in here, something bad is going to happen. My kid needs my help. There are ways of doing that without being really obvious about it. Okay. So you can casually interrupt and redirect to something different. So if you hear arguing over a game or something, you could just say, "Hey guys, I happen to make some snacks downstairs. I'm sure you're probably hungry. Why don't you come on down and you guys can have something to eat?" Okay. So interrupt and redirect. You're not interrupting and saying, "Hey, I'm hearing arguing. Why are you guys arguing?" That will potentially be very embarrassing for both your teen and the peer, and create a very uncomfortable situation. So you're going to interrupt and redirect. You can also bring attention to something different by casually mentioning another activity. So for example, if the activity that they're doing is going south, you could say, "Oh, hey Joey, I just wanted to remind you, I know you really wanted to play that new video game with so and so at some point. I set it up for you guys if you want to give that a shot." Okay. So you're giving them an opportunity to redirect their attention to something different and try again without calling out the fact that they're having trouble, right? Maybe your child is not picking up on social cues, and their peer is advocating for something and they're not hearing it. How do we bring that to your teen's attention without embarrassing them? So you're going to come up with some sort of excuse to call them away, right? You may, "Hey Johnny, can I need your help with something in the kitchen." And they're going to come down to the kitchen, peer is going to stay where they are. That's an opportunity for you to talk through or coach them how to overcome an obstacle that they're encountering, or things that they're missing. Okay. Again, you're doing it away from the peer. So you're ensuring that that the interactions remain comfortable with it between the peers. You're preserving your child's dignity, and respecting their space and their desire for autonomy and independence, but you're still coaching them and you're still helping them because they're going to need help. Now, if things really, really go south, right, then you may need to come up with an excuse to end the get together earlier and regroup and figure out what you need to plan for differently the next time. And this is where, when we talk at the end briefly, how to debrief, that is going to be an important step. And if things are going south and you do have to end early, you want to help figure out how you can end it on a positive note. So this is where that interrupting and redirecting may be helpful, getting them to end on a positive note by doing something together that perhaps limits the amount of conversation that they need to have, like having a snack and then saying goodbye when it's time to leave. Because as much as possible, we always want to end on a positive note, because our child, our teen, is going to remember that interaction, that last interaction, and how it felt, and that's going to influence their motivation level to then want to try it again. Okay, so ending a get together, there are steps for that as well, right? So if you have a time limit on your get together, then there's really that kind of takes some of the thinking away from it. If it's more open ended, then you're going to want to teach your teen to wait for a pause or wait for a natural end to an activity. And you're going to want to have them come up with a cover story or give some sort of excuse for why the activity's ending. So, "Hey, I promised that I'd be home at 6 for dinner. It was really nice hanging out. It's maybe we can do it again sometime. See you later." Okay. Teaching your teen to periodically check the time so they can be mindful of and respectful of when a get together is going to end. And again, not checking the time obsessively, right? Because then if we're over teaching the idea of checking the time, then that's really rude in social interactions. But, perhaps every half an hour or every hour, you're going to take a glance at the time to figure out where you are. And again, some of these are really high level skills, right? So your teen may not be at the level where they're able to work on some of these skills, because you need to prioritize some of the other skills first. So if you're just starting out with get-togethers, the skills for ending a get-together are going to be less important than figuring out how to identify a peer, how to identify location, how to identify what you're going to be doing. So again, this is just like an overall picture from the start of finding a peer to the end of a successful hangout. That doesn't mean that, you know, if your team hasn't had practice with this, that you should be tackling all of these things at once. That's going to be overwhelming for your team. It's going to be overwhelming for you. And it's going to feel like an impossible task. So prioritize the most important skills and start with practicing those first. Again, if your teen has a peer at their house, you're going to want to walk them out. So there's some sort of closure to every interaction. People don't just abruptly get up and leave. I couldn't hear what you said. I apologize. I don't know how my Siri turned on there. I don't know if anyone heard that. It's got a mind of its own. I swear, it's listening to everything we do and say. So every interaction has some sort of closure, and we want to be able to, at some point when our teen is ready, teach them that on some level. So, you know, you may just start off with them saying goodbye and skip all of these other steps, because perhaps that's where they're at, and that's where, you know, they need to start with their practice. And then you'll add levels of complexity and challenges as you go along. Okay. This is really, really important. So we talked about practicing, right? And I gave the analogy of the bicycle. And I said, okay, you get on that bike, you try your best, but that's not where it ends, right? Someone comes back and says, hey, this is what you did really great. And this is what you need to do in order to keep your balance the next time, okay? So a post hangout debrief is really important. And this is not intended to be set up in a way that we're grilling our teen on everything they did wrong or everything they did right, or figuring out why they did something the way they did. That's not the intention of this. This is intended to be set up like a coaching collaborative conversation. So, hey, Johnny, you know, what do you think? What did you really like about your hangout with Joey? What was really hard about the hangout? And listen to what your teen is telling you or identifying. And if they don't have the words to identify that, then you may just have to help your teen, guide your teen to come up with those things as you are, you know, a covert observer throughout the course of that hangout. Come up with a plan. Okay, what are we going to do next time? What are we going to change? What do we need to practice more of in order to get better, right? Think about this and every other social interaction that you are trying to teach your teen, your child, in the same way as teaching them to learn to ride a bike. You're going to coach them through it. You're going to reassure them. You're going to check in with them. You're going to tell them what they did well. And you're going to set up a plan with them on what they need to do next. So now, if you've had one successful hangout, it does not end there. After you have that debrief, you need to start that process over again, because the more opportunities that your teen has to practice these skills, just like the more times you get on that bike, the better you will be able to get. And maybe eventually you'll even learn some tips and tricks along the way, similar to riding a bike. So all of these steps are really, really important when we're coaching our teens to begin to understand how setting up a hangout, how going through a hangout works. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the presentation, and we have a few minutes left. So if there are any questions, we can address those now. And I think someone, oh, no, there's something in the chat. So if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I have successfully figured out how to monitor it. It only took like us doing 10 webinars together for me to get this, but I think I finally got it.
Yeah, and then Zoom will update next week and then we'll have to refigure it out.
Right. Yep. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's par for the course of what we've learned in 2020 is nothing remains constant and we have to adapt and change all the time. So.
Yeah, that is the evolution this year for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm still waiting for them to have some sort of like waiting music. I feel like that should be like that. Because I know if people are typing, it takes a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. We keep talking about this every single time. Elevator music. I think you should pitch that, Carolina, to Zoom.
Yeah, I think I might actually. I keep saying it every time.
Yeah.
It's just that awkward Zoom silence.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I should just put my phone on and just put it up to the speaker and there you go. Problem solved.
Oh, there you go.
That was great, Justyna.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
That was so specific.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there's Peers is a really, really great curriculum and we use that a lot. And so this particular curriculum is Peers curriculum for school-based professionals. And it breaks down so many skills for adolescents. Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh.
Yeah, but there's so many great resources out there. It's just a matter of going through them and kind of, picking and choosing what's, the most important and how to prioritize, because there's a lot of overlap too, a lot of redundancy across different curriculums.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard about Peers, which I kind of found a little odd.
Oh, yeah, you have to check it out. So it's by Elizabeth Lawson, and she has, they have a Peers, I think, preschools curriculum, and they also have one for adults.
Okay.
And it's the structure of it is incredible. I mean, it breaks down every skill that you need to teach, helps you identify, where to start with the teaching process, provides examples of how to practice it. It's a really great curriculum.
Oh, I'm going to look into that. Did you send me her name?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
send you that information when I send you guys the slides, I'll send you the links to those references.
That'll be great.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Do you guys use that at the Hangout Spot? Do you also use it in Norwalk in the school system?
So I don't know if that's something that Norwalk formally uses. They didn't when we were there. Megan and I did use it for some of the cases that we had when we worked in Norwalk. But I don't think it's like a district-wide thing. But it's a pretty well-known curriculum in our field. So, definitely for the higher functioning students, learners, and specifically, so the curriculum itself is designed for individuals on the spectrum, wherever they fall. But the skills are relevant to everyone, and the teaching breakdown for how they approach it is how we teach any skill. So it's really cool. It's adaptable.
Yeah, I think that's what I found almost most intriguing, that it was for you have, these are skills for any child. And then some children have some parts of it, and some children have, less and more. And but it was really nice how it was broken down.
Yeah.
So I don't see any more.
I think
and I see people are kind of dropping off. So Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Justyna.
And I'm sure we will see you again at some
Sounds good.
point.
Again soon.
All
Thank
right.
you. I enjoy doing these with you. We enjoy doing these with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
All right.
Okay. See you soon. Bye, guys.
Bye.